Random House Audio presents Petersburg, a guided tour from Jeff Shaara's Civil War battlefields. What happened, why it matters, and what to see, by Jeff Shaara. Read for you by Robertson Dean. Petersburg, Virginia, June 1864 to April 1865. What happened here? Petersburg was as valuable to the Confederate cause as any city in the South. The city itself was a booming metropolis, with a population approaching 20,000, 6 times the size of Chattanooga, and served as the most important eastern rail center north of Atlanta. 5 separate rail lines fed into the city, creating a hub that supplied most of Richmond's needs as well. The capture of Petersburg meant that the Confederate capital would be sealed off from every rail link but one, and Grant knew that if he could control Petersburg, he would have driven one more hard stake into the heart of the Confederate economy. The first attempt to capture Petersburg had come while the battered Grant and the victorious Lee still snarled at each other at Cold Harbor. On June 9, 1864, Benjamin Butler had managed to transport a force of close to 5,000 men across the waterway that hemmed him in at Bermuda Hundred. The troops were a combination of infantry and cavalry, whose mission was to occupy the still lightly defended city. But, true to form, the coordination between foot soldier and horse soldier was virtually non-existent, and a small force of local rebel defenders, including old men and boys too young for service, drove the confused Federals away. Butler's plan dissolved. Despite Butler's inept handling of the affair, Grant stayed focused on Petersburg. Suspecting that Lee simply didn't have the manpower to adequately protect both Richmond and Petersburg, Grant reasoned that Petersburg would continue to be lightly defended until Grant showed his true intentions. Lee had seemed to be more concerned with protecting Richmond, and if Grant could make a bold stroke, a sharp, decisive advance straight into Petersburg, he might catch Lee completely by surprise. Though Lee had inflicted a major defeat on Grant's army at Cold Harbor, Grant's proven aggressiveness meant that no Confederate could allow himself to relax and celebrate. In mid-June 1864, while Lee remained close to Richmond, P.G.T. Beauregard held command south of the James River. Neither man could make offensive plans until it was known what Grant intended to do. On June 15th, they got their first major clue. Grant ordered Baldy Smith's 18th Corps to move toward Petersburg and confront whatever opposition they would find there, knowing that Smith's Federal troops would certainly outnumber anything that stood in their way. Unlike Butler's force of 5,000, Smith's Corps numbered close to 17,000, and Grant ordered Hancock's 2nd Corps, another 20,000 men, to back Smith up. As Smith's forces drove toward the outskirts of Petersburg, they came upon the same line of earthworks and fortifications that Butler's troops had faced. It was known as the Dimmock Line, named for the Confederate engineer who 2 years earlier had responded to fears about the vulnerability of the city by constructing a 10-mile loop of defensive positions along Petersburg's eastern perimeter. Though Dimmock's defenses were strong of construction and soundly designed, they lacked the one thing that would actually make them effective: soldiers. As Baldy Smith's Federals approached the ring of fortifications, Beauregard could confront them with a total defensive force of only 2,200 soldiers and militia. Smith's men quickly pushed the rebels out of their lines, and Beauregard recognized that Petersburg was in serious trouble. Working frantically, the Confederate commander pulled troops away from their cork at Bermuda Hundred and withdrew them into Petersburg. While the Confederates were scrambling to deal with the crisis, Smith's Federals were poised at the edge of a virtually undefended city. But Smith's men were slow to advance, and yet again, coordination between infantry and cavalry simply fell apart. Hours passed, and Smith became deeply concerned, since Hancock's men had not yet arrived on the field. As the afternoon drifted toward evening, Smith realized that his primary attack could not begin until very late in the day. Baldy Smith then made his worst decision as a commander. He simply stopped. Hancock's efforts to reach the field in time to assist in the attack had been doomed by the now common failures of the clumsy communications system in Grant's army. Baldy Smith was under Butler's command and received his orders through a different channel from that of Hancock, whose orders came through George Meade. Though Grant knew exactly what he intended the two Federal corps to accomplish, he put his plan into action with a flawed and inefficient system. Hancock arrived on the field well after dark, and his entire corps was not available until midnight. Instead of adding Hancock's strength to his own, Smith decided, on his own initiative, that Hancock should make the attack instead. Smith thus requested that the Second Corps move up to take the place of the 18th. Hancock outranked Smith, but he had received no clear orders from Meade about what he was expected to do, so he bowed to Smith's decision-making. Very late that night, Hancock received word directly from Grant that Hancock and not Smith was to command the two corps in a combined attack. All through the night, while confusion reigned on the Federal side of the lines, Petersburg was filling rapidly with Confederate troops. Instead of launching the two-corps attack, Hancock hesitated when he received word that additional reinforcements were on the way. Whether Hancock actually needed them is doubtful. Throughout the day on June 16th, the Federals strengthened their position with the addition of two more corps, Burnside's 9th and Warren's 5th. By nightfall, Meade himself had arrived on the field to take overall command. The following morning, June 17th, the Federals prepared to assault the Petersburg defenses with a force totaling 70,000 men. Facing them, Beauregard had fewer than 15,000 to put into place. The attack was driven hard, and all along the line Confederate positions collapsed, overrun by far superior numbers and, finally, well-coordinated assaults. But the Confederates used their strong defensive positions to their greatest advantage, and though Meade's troops made significant advances, they were unable to force a breakthrough that would allow them to swarm into Petersburg itself. But the Federals clearly had the upper hand, and by day's end, Beauregard was once again facing a major crisis. Just before dawn on June 18th, the Federal forces resumed their attack, both Grant and Meade confident that no rebel works could hold back the combined assault. When the Federal troops reached the enemy's lines, they were shocked to find them empty. Though Beauregard continued to add fresh troops into his defenses, he had recognized the inevitable, so during the night he had quietly pulled his men farther back into a new line of solid trenches. The Federal field commanders, realizing they didn't actually know where the enemy had gone, began to slow their advance. Aides were sent scurrying back to headquarters, seeking orders. In some parts of the line, the blue-coated troops attacked anyway, driving forward until they actually reached someone to fight. But those fights were scattered, with no cohesion on their flanks. Throughout the day, the Confederates continued to strengthen their lines, throwing back one disjointed attack after another. As the sun set, the attack stopped, the sullen Federal troops returning to their lines, cursing their officers, who cursed the commanders above them. They knew exactly what Grant knew. Their best chance to capture Petersburg had been frittered away. Already frustrated, Grant then learned one more piece of information, passed along by rebel prisoners through their captors. Since Grant had made his move, Lee had responded accordingly. Along with the columns of Confederate troops who continued to strengthen Beauregard's lines, Lee himself had ridden south and was now in Petersburg. Though Beauregard had performed an admirable, if not heroic, task in saving Petersburg, once more, Grant would face Lee. This time, instead of maneuver and flexibility, Lee would have to rely on the same kind of defensive position that had won him the day at Cold Harbor. But Grant had learned his lesson. There would be no more massive, full-scale frontal assaults against a well-fortified enemy. Grant might finally have had Lee right in front of him, but, for the first time, Grant seemed to appreciate the value of patience. With Lee forced to hold tight to Petersburg, Grant's superior numbers would give the Federal Army an even greater advantage than before. The wisest strategy for Grant now was the same strategy that had worked at Vicksburg, a siege. But Petersburg gave Grant one enormous advantage over Vicksburg. There was no great barrier that protected one side of the city, no Mississippi River to challenge Grant's maneuverability. Grant's army outnumbered Lee by roughly...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?